International Award, or the Duke of Edinburgh's Award. The equivalent in Ireland is Gaisce, the President's Award, and it's very much part of the International Award family, and we're very proud of that. And I've been involved for many, many years in that front. But also, I've been volunteering with the lifeboat service in Galway and ambulance service, Order Malta, and so on and so forth. So that's just gives you a flavour of my background. I'm in the latter stages of finishing a PhD at the moment on international human rights law as well. So it's very much a human rights perspective I bring, but I'm not going to try to indoctrinate anybody today. I purely want to share my reflections on really the times that we live in, and the need, I think, for us to have and to cultivate ambitious leadership at a time when we do face with very, very severe challenges, but also significant, I think, opportunities. So we might go to the next slide, Laura, please. It's probably important to just reflect before we start talking about the turbulent times and so on, and this very interesting picture, which we'll discuss in a second. It's probably important, I think, to remember that the world has probably never been in a better place in terms of security, in terms of human development, in terms of, believe it or not, equality. The world is in a very, very good place as a general point in the context of history, in the context of particularly the last sort of 2 centuries of history. And I think it's important that we remember that we always qualify everything on the basis of progress that has been made. But having said that, there's a lot that's left to be done. We are facing a very difficult time. At the moment, you hear across all of Europe, you hear about this reference to the new normal, you know, the post-COVID crisis, or the COVID, let's say, while it's underway, the COVID crisis, bringing a kind of a new normal. And that new normal is marked by the fact that, you know, we have worldwide more than 7 million people who have been taken ill by COVID, more than 400,000 people who have died from COVID-19. And, you know, I think it's important as well to say at the outset that there are probably people on this call, on this meeting, at this conference, who have either been directly affected by COVID-19, or maybe have lost someone, or someone is very ill with it, and our thoughts are with those people at the moment. It's not something abstract or academic. This is very real. It's very much happening now, and it's caused all sorts of consequences on economies and societies. It's required us to adapt in fundamental ways, the way we work, the way we live our lives, our pace of life, how we access basic support systems. In actual fact, it's turned the value system on its head, hasn't it, in a way? You know, until now, there are certain jobs or categories of jobs where, you know, it was almost as if some people considered those jobs to be just dispensable or worthless. But in actual fact, we see that they are the most valuable often. You know, the local shopkeeper, the delivery guy, the postman, you know, and I mean no offense at all. On the contrary, I'm actually trying to emphasize that it's just presented to us a situation where we realize the value of everybody in society. So that is our new normal. That is our new reality at the moment, and we have to address that. But I think this picture is quite interesting, because what this picture says, to me at least, is that we may be, we may all be living through the same storm, but we're not all in the same boat. We're all in very different boats, and we face this with a very different set of circumstances behind us. You know, and some of us will be able to weather this storm better than others, just by the nature of our circumstances. And I think as we move forward, we need to consider, and I speak from the point of view as a policymaker, a civil servant for the Irish government, but I think it's equally applicable to all of us. As we move forward, we need to be thinking about everybody, including the little guy in the canoe, or the little guy who's not even in the canoe, or lady. You know, how do we make sure that our future is one that brings everybody together forward. Everybody's well-being is considered and looked after. These are turbulent times, but we need now leadership to get through that. We might go through the next slide there, Laura, please. So it begs the question then, if this is the new normal, well, what was the old normal? Was the old normal something, was it perfect? Was it ideal? Were we in a situation where, you know, everything was rosy and we want to just get back to that? We want to sort of renormalize, revert to what was our existence beforehand. Yes, maybe for some people it may be the case that they think that actually things were great beforehand, you know, that they had a high quality of life and things, you know, couldn't be better. From my perspective, I don't think that's really true. I think that, you know, this wordle in front of you is just to give you a sense of some of the words that come to my mind when I think about the old normal. Inequality is not by accident there in the highest font size and in bold and very, very pronounced, because I do think that we had a deeply rooted inequality crisis throughout the European Union. I speak for Ireland anyway. We certainly have. We have problems with equality. Equality in relation to not only gender equality, but also the way we deal with and engage with and treat minority communities on a par with the rest of the population. We had major problems there. Other words that jump out at me are issues around social justice, human rights, homelessness, access to housing, climate, biodiversity crisis, quality of employment. You know, I mentioned earlier about the value system and how we recognize some professions as maybe more valuable than others. You know, we have to recognize that although we in this country had a 4.5% unemployment rate, that is an unbelievably low level of unemployment prior to COVID-19. It was almost unprecedented. But what does that number hide? That number hides 4.5%, who are perhaps the most hard to reach people in terms of their access to employment. They may be those who have a former criminal conviction or a disability, or are isolated one way or the other from mainstream society, if you want to put it like that, are at a disadvantage. So this was the reality of the old normal, and I think it's important that we reflect on that. So all of those challenges were going to be challenges that we have to deal with seriously as we go forward, irrespective of COVID. But now it's all the more pronounced, I think, that we address these issues. We might move to the next slide there, Laura, please. Look at these pictures. Tell me what you think. I mean, this is rhetorical. You don't need to answer me, but we will actually open the floor at the end for some questions and maybe answers, and I'd like to hear your thoughts and comments. But just look at these pictures and see if they sort of, some of them resonate with you in your life. This again was part of the old normal. You know, how did our lives look individually? Was there long commutes? In the Irish context, we had a situation where 200,000 people were commuting 1 hour per day in the morning and 1 hour per day in the evening to get to their work. 2 hours per day, every day of their working lives in a car, probably in a traffic jam like that. The guy down in the bottom left corner, certainly I feel like that sometimes. Juggling your work and your home life, and you know, if you're lucky enough to have children, you know, kids in the mix as well, that are maybe not getting the attention that they deserve, maybe because of photo number one, the top right there, where we see these pockets of people and a kind of a chasm between them. Is that something that was a reality? Were people becoming more distant from one another? And I guess the bottom right photo speaks to that as well. You know, and we can all relate to this anytime we have taken buses or trains in any European city. Well, maybe not in every European city, I won't want to generalize, but a lot of the time we are immersed in our own little micro world, in our own iPhone or telephone or tablet or whatever it is, and not interacting with the outside world. So we might be close to people and in contact, but we may feel very, very distant and very, very isolated. You know, do we want to recover that? Is this the future we want? I don't think it is. Laura, you can go to the next slide, please. And I'm sorry, I don't want to depress everybody here. I promise I'll lighten it up in a moment, but I just think it's important to reflect a little bit on where we are. There was a very interesting survey done, now it's 2018, so it's already, I think, out of date, but nevertheless, it's quite an interesting one, by Ipsos, where 20,000 respondents from across 27 countries answered a series of questions around their perceptions of division or of tolerance or social cohesion in their countries. And I found the results of this quite shocking, quite honestly, because if you look at the left question, it says, my country is more divided than 10 years ago. And the response rate to that is that 66% of European respondents said that, yes, indeed, my country is more divided now than it was 10 years ago. And that's not far off what the response rate was like in Latin America and North America, a little bit less in Asia, but nevertheless, you're talking half of all of the people, in a large part of the world saying that their country is divided, polarized. Then if you look on the right-hand side of that question, it says, my country is less tolerant than 10 years ago. And in the European context, it says that almost half of all of those respondents said that their country is less tolerant. For me, these are two major red flag issues here. One is that it points to a clear social cohesion, a question of social cohesion. And secondly, a question of tolerance. And I think they're major concerns to be considered by us as policymakers, but also us as citizens. What has made us feel more divided in the last 10 years? And what has made us feel less tolerant in the last 10 years? And sorry, another question for you to think about is, do you think those figures will be different today than they were in 2018, given all that's happened in the meantime? Maybe. Perhaps worse, perhaps better. It's really something to consider. Laura, the next slide is kind of draws on those, I think. And apologies, it might be difficult to see this, but if you look quite closely, this is all of this is available on the Ipsos website, by the way. This is part of the same study. How divided was your country? And the percentage here is to indicate very divided or fairly divided. And I mean, it's quite staggering again that we see the perception of division. Overall, the average is 76% feel either very or fairly divided, with some countries up as high as 93% in the case of Serbia. But again, I don't want to pick any particular country out. It's just interesting to look at that data and to ask the question, why? Why would that be? Unfortunately, Ireland is not represented on that. But again, it's fair to say that the trend across most of the European countries that are indicated there is fairly negative. So check your country, see if you would agree or if you disagree. What are your personal thoughts on that? We might come back to that towards the end. Laura, you can move ahead there, please. So answering the question why, I'm proposing a few different thoughts about why that might be the case. And these are my personal thoughts that, we have found ourselves in a position where politics has become more polarized. There's a lot of discussion about the far right or the far left or whatever it may be. Whatever it may be, the point is that there certainly appears to be more and more polarization, a shrinking space for consensus. That a sort of perception that if you are tolerant to a certain tenet of thinking from a different political camp, that you're sort of sold out. We're in an age of absolutes, and I think that that's also linked to populism, where populism, for us to understand what populism means, populism really means that one narrative prevails and there's no space for other narratives. It's not about being popular. It's about squeezing out those narratives that don't match your own. And we see this in many countries. Poor social cohesion. Going back to the pictures I shared a little bit earlier, how cohesive are we as societies? Are we living together and tolerating each other? Or are we actually working together? Are we actually trying to find a way to proactively include and engage with all parts of society to ensure that everybody has a fair chance to be to fulfill their own potential and to be productive members of society? Question of tolerance of intolerance. Are we tolerant of intolerance? And what I mean by that is, do we allow a situation to pass whereby, common everyday intolerance, casual intolerance, casual racism even, is seeping in, and we leave it unquestioned, unchecked? Do we tolerate the intolerance? Again, living in the kind of Twitter era, are we becoming kind of conditioned almost to express outrage, the 160 characters or whatever it is, give our quick reaction, be sensational, maybe get the hits, get the views, get the likes, all that type of thing? Is that being cultivated somehow, rather than engaging critically, really discussing issues, finding the space to have that balance, that narrative around different issues, to try to not to confront each other, but to try to develop a shared understanding and to try to create some kind of common ground of understanding. Growth, economic growth, every government is concerned with this, our own one too, and more so will be the case in the recovery phase around economic growth, because we need to get people back to work. That's clear, and every country needs to do the same. We need to get economies up and running. It's absolutely crucial. Many of you are probably in business. Many of you in business or thinking about going into business will be nervous, very much legitimately, by the current situation, and want to get back on your feet and get your businesses running again. And that's right and proper, and governments should be supporting that, and I think they are. But the question I have is, are we focused on the right kind of growth, or should we be looking more towards how can we ensure sustainable and inclusive growth? Growth that is not just the highest profit for the lowest number of shareholders. What about the highest value for society? What about high profit with high impact and high value for society? They're not mutually exclusive. We can work for that, and that's what social enterprise seeks to achieve. And then finally, unilateralism versus multilateralism. Here, I mean, I think the COVID-19 crisis has shown, if it ever needed to be shown, that going it alone is a recipe for failure. That we rely on the multilateral system. We have built and cultivated an extensive multilateral system, and we rely on that. But there are some tendencies in certain countries to look more towards unilateralism and say, we are a sovereign, independent state, we'll do it our own way, and we don't actually need to have to be engaging with other countries in the way that we used to. So they're just questions for you. I'd ask you to have a think about it and see if you agree with me or not. So that leads me to my first, if we go to the next slide, Laura, that leads me to my first, I suppose, reflection, if you want to put it like that. My first reflection is, let's not let the past dictate the future. Laura, you can move to the next point there. Let's not let the past dictate the future. And if you click ahead there, Laura, we need now more than ever, we need leaders to make the change. And to make the change in our families, in our communities, in our societies, and in our world. We need more than ever leaders to embrace and engage with these turbulent times and look forward with ambition, and not accept that all that stuff that I've discussed there is going to just continue, because it doesn't need to. But we just need to change our mentality first and foremost. And as I said, leadership is something that's not just a matter of leading in a very public way. It's about how do we lead ourselves individually, in our own actions, in our own thoughts, in our own communities, societies, or organizations. And I think that is the spirit in which I want to discuss leadership today. So I'm suggesting a new paradigm. This new paradigm is the next slide, Laura. The new paradigm is one that I think speaks to the reality of what we've experienced in sustainable development over the years. That actually all of these things on this illustration are very much interlinked and interdependent. People, planet, peace, partnership, prosperity. This is a new paradigm for a better future. And those of you who are familiar with the UN Sustainable Development Goals obviously will be familiar with all of this language. But the point is that we can't any longer treat one goal in isolation from another. They are all interlinked. When I do my work in relation to rural policy in Ireland, we don't think about rural as distinct from urban. We think about the interdependence between the rural and the urban. You might live in a peri-urban or a rural area, but you may work in an urban area. You may live and work in an urban area, but you may socialize or you may travel to rural areas. Invariably, you rely on the agricultural produce from rural areas. This is a clear interdependence between people and planet, as it were. But we need to think beyond that as well, about reinforcing the linkages as well and the partnerships. And I'll come back to partnership in a little while. But what I'm suggesting is this new paradigm is what we need the new generation of leaders to be thinking about, is thinking about these things holistically. And how can we be leaders for all of this together for our collective benefit? So that brings me to the next reflection. Laura, you can move to the next slide, please. And that is know your mission. It sounds James Bond-like, but what I'm saying here is know what you are trying to achieve. What is the issue that really gets you going? What is the issue that you think deserves your attention? It might be the issue that drives you into business, but it might not be that. It might be the reason that you are active in JCI. It might be the reason you're active in a whole range of other areas. Know what your mission is. That is absolutely critical. Laura, you can move to the next slide, please. And ask yourselves a few questions. What are you trying to achieve? Why are you trying to achieve that? And it's a question you should periodically, I think about is, well, why are we doing it? And why are we doing it in this way? And then finally, what's your unique contribution? Where do you see yourself? Where can you add value? Not all leaders are the extroverts, the front line. They're not always the most outspoken. They're not always the ones that are in the limelight. They may be the one who is quietly, conscientiously bringing a team forward or bringing objectives forward, making things happen behind the scenes, being the real leader, but in a way that we don't always understand leadership. And at these times, we need that kind of leadership as well. We need all kinds. So know your mission. The next point I would make is to think about, well, what underpins your mission? You need to be guided by your values. Laura, you can move ahead to the next slide, please. You need to be guided by your values. And what values? What do I mean by values? I mean, when we're faced with a time of crisis like we're currently faced with, we won't know the answers to the next challenge that's in front of us. We might not even know the question. But the point is that when you're faced with times of crisis, the best insurance that we can have is our values. We understand certain basic principles that underpin everything that we do. And when we're in doubt, we look back to our values, and that guides us in terms of determining what our next step might be. And we shouldn't be overwhelmed by the scale of a crisis or of a challenge or any kind of a project. We should just think about, well, what is the next best thing we can do in this given situation? The next step, what is the next best thing we can do? I want to share with you in the next slide now, Laura, you can move ahead. The next slide, I want to share with you some of the things that I think are guiding, at least for me. And maybe some of them resonate with you and maybe not. It'll come as no surprise to you, human rights, given my background. I believe in honesty and integrity. I think that if we don't have that, and that those two elements are critically important. They're critically important when you serve the state as well, in a position like I'm in, that we're honest about where we're weak, and we're honest about where we need to do more or where we failed, because that is what will allow us to acknowledge and respond in an appropriate, hopefully appropriate way. Equality, dignity, fairness, respect, solidarity, cooperation, independence. These are the kind of values that that guide me. But you may have different values, and your values may depend very much on what your circumstances are, what your project is, what your line of work is, and so on and so forth. But I do think that a lot of these are universal. And actually, probably some of you have noticed that Eleanor Roosevelt is on the right-hand side of there in the picture, holding up the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It's worth reading that document if you have never done so. It's very, very interesting. It's a very interesting aspirational document from the 1940s, just after the war, when the members of the fledgling United Nations came together and actually put down for the first time a set of common rights that were aspirational in the sense that they weren't legally enforceable, but they were put down in a sense to try to make them legally enforceable, and many have become ever since. And now for those of us who are in the European Union on the call, the vast majority of them are enshrined in either the European Convention on Human Rights or the European Social Charter. So it's really worth having a look at that document and seeing if it inspires you in terms of your thinking around values. I'm sorry, I'm not seeing if there are comments coming in. Laura, you might you might just let me know if there's something that needs a response immediately. I'm very happy to take questions as I go, but I just can't see the comments as coming in.
We had some thoughts at the beginning from Laura. Some thoughts that unemployment number does not include people who do not show up on current social services support list. Example, a mother wanting to return to work after spending some years raising her children.
Very good point. Yeah, very, very good point. Again, that speaks to the point I'm trying to make. Actually, is how you can get a distorted picture from looking just at those brute statistics. That's a very, very good point. Was there any other point or question raised, or anybody wants to raise at this stage?
No. Okay. If anybody wants to raise, they can either raise their hand or write in the chat, and I'll allow them to talk.
Great, thank you. Super. Okay, so I might just continue then with my next point. And again, it's just a suggestion from my perspective. You can move on to the next slide, please. Be authentic. Be yourself. If we're trying to talk about leadership for the future and cultivating leaders within us, we need to, I think, be authentic. Be who you are, and don't try to be some other type of person. The next slide, I'm offering a couple of questions to think about, or points to think about when it comes to being authentic. So you can move ahead to the next page there, please. Be aware, first of all, of who you are and be true to you. Find your voice. And here, what I mean by voice, and why is voice in inverted commas? Voice is in inverted commas because you don't always need to have a voice to be a leader. You lead with your actions, with your thoughts, with your ideas. Lead with what you do. Lead with how you can influence in any number of ways without necessarily being the voice or being the front person. But find your voice, whatever that is. Yeah, as strange as it might sound, find your voice in your actions, if you like. And the final point there on that slide is, don't fear failure. Recognize it, embrace it, and seize it. Failure is the best possible way for us to learn to how we can do our business even better. We shouldn't be afraid of it. And actually, in my opinion, we should be showcasing our failure. If we're really confident and strong and really want to be change makers, we should be actually flying the flag of our failures. We tried this and it didn't work because of X, Y, Z. Hence, we're going to do it differently. And this is what we've learned from it. There's nothing actually more powerful, I think, than a person who wears their bad experiences, in a sense, on their sleeve and says, I want to take it forward and do better next time. Embrace it, seize it, learn from it, note it, and take it forward. Let it shape you in your leadership. That for me is about being authentic. Be an authentic leader. Don't try to play the role. Find your own leadership style within yourself. We can move to the next page, please. So the next token of advice I would have is around partnerships. And I think this is critical. I spoke earlier about the multilateralism versus unilateralism and the importance of partnerships on an international scale. But it doesn't matter what we do, we need partnerships. We need to ensure that we're not going it alone. We may do well on our own. Actually, we may do a great job on our own on certain projects. But are we going to have a bigger impact, a more systemic or widespread impact if we work with people, if we find and cultivate partnerships? I think yes is the answer to that. All kinds of partnerships. The next slide gives you some of my thoughts around what kind of partnerships are worth cherishing and cultivating. First one is family and friends. We need to not forget where we come from and what matters most to us in our lives. And those who are closest to us, maybe this COVID pandemic has shown that more than ever, the importance of family. When we've been deprived of the opportunity to be with our family as often as we would like, and our friends, our family and friends are number one. But after that, you also partnerships in terms of networks and communities of practice. You can move to the next one, please. Networks and communities of practice. Networks like JCI are critical at this time for us to share our thoughts and our experiences, for us to critique each other, support each other, bounce ideas off each other, learn from each other, put each other into line if we step out of line as well. I think that's important, that we take the advice, the good, the bad, and the ugly. It's critical for us to be building networks and building communities of practice in certain areas. The next partnership that I think is critical is with civil society and the media. In Ireland, when the COVID-19 crisis took hold, it wasn't the state that took the lead in the response. It wasn't private business that took the lead in the response. It was community groups, civil society organizations, non-governmental organizations. They were the ones who were on the front line, the length and breadth of the country, delivering Meals on Wheels, checking in on people, ensuring that human contact, providing frontline services to people all over the country, and particularly those who are most vulnerable. The community and voluntary sector in any country is absolutely critical for a healthy democracy. We've seen that more and more in this country, but it's, I think, the same in all other countries, that it's absolutely critical. And I think that a vibrant civil society is something we should be all striving for, and partnerships with them as much as we can, I think, is really valuable and worth considering. The media as well, because I see the media as an extension of civil society in terms of providing impartial, or what should be at least impartial analysis, impartial critique, and information for society. Absolutely essential. And of course, media can be a very helpful way for us to transmit and convey our message, and also for us to be held to account for anything that we do as leaders. The next is business. Again, I think probably many of you are in business or are thinking about becoming active in business. Business relationships are essential, and I think there's not enough of this actually, and particularly not enough between the latter 2 points there, between civil society and business. Business, I mean, probably the most profound change makers in the world are probably businesses, because businesses, with the capital that business has, the influence that business has, the capacities that business have to potentially do good. When I think back to the sustainable development slides that I used earlier, around the planet, around people, around well-being and livelihoods, it is critical that we have partnerships with business, and that businesses adopt, to the extent that they can, a consciousness of sustainable development. And what we see, I mean, we see with the Deloitte Human Capital Survey recently, which said that something in the region, and I'm sure somebody on the call knows the data better than I, but it was something in the ballpark of 75 to 80% of young people surveyed said that they were conscious of the social consciousness of businesses, that they want to see businesses that are acting responsibly throughout the supply chain and in terms of how they deal with their customers and how they deal with the environment. And I think that's really quite telling. So this is not just a question of a good thing to do, good for the planet, but it's actually good business. And social enterprise, I think, is the future, quite honestly. There's a social enterprise revolution happening in this country and throughout Europe. Social enterprises are businesses, but with a difference, because social enterprises are businesses, but they have a specific social or environmental goal. And profits that are made in social enterprises are reinvested to achieve that central goal. So this is a very different business model. It's much more like the cooperative model of the past. If you, in the Irish context or the British context, agricultural co-ops were very, very popular. If you're Italian or Spanish or French on this call, you'll be kind of laughing because, of course, you've got such an extensive social enterprise sector. But I think social enterprise is the future. And what we need to do is try to find a way to ensure there's more complementarity between social enterprise and private business. And sorry, the last one on this list, and I'll move on then, is government, local and central government. So, but I'll discuss that more in the next slide. We might move to the next slide there, Laura, please. Yeah, actually, sorry, before I do, that last point there on the right-hand side of the slide is how? Well, reach out. Reach out. Very often, we underestimate the power of just a phone call, of picking up the phone or reaching out to any of these different groups and saying, how can I help? How can we work together? We're on the same page here. Is there a way we can collaborate? What do you need? What can I do? That type of thing. Just do it. Just reach out directly. And it really can forge partnerships very, very quickly. The next slide is I'm presenting what I call the quintuple helix. You may have seen it previously, or you may have seen the triple or the quadruple helix, but this is the quintuple helix. And the quintuple helix is a kind of a representation of what I'm trying to say here around partnerships. So if we can move on to the next slide there, please. Yeah. So essentially, this is about purposeful partnership, where we have an ecosystem in which there is an overlap, a constructive overlap between all of the various sectors of society. And I think we broadly break them down here as government, industry, community, academia, but then all within a broader international context, a broader international environment, multilateral environment. And within that, you would probably have, for instance, the UN and the overarching UN SDG framework and so on and so forth. And that's, I think, what we need to be working towards. We need to work towards this purposeful partnership, that we don't see these sectors as isolated from one another, or one trying to get the best benefit from the other, or one being mistrustful of the other, as may be the case in certain situations. No, we need to find a way that we get that sweet spot right in the middle there, that sweet spot where we are benefiting from the world-class research, and we're benefiting from the best that community can offer and industry can offer, and that government is listening, and that government is not only listening, but it's responsive, and it's doing what it can about what it hears. I think that's really, really crucial. So that leads me to the very last point of sort of, I suppose, observations in terms of leadership in turbulent times, is yourself. Invest in yourself. This is very easy to overlook. I am awful when it comes to investing in myself, when it comes to self-care, but it is essential. If we can move to the next slide there, please. Well-being of our own well-being is essential. Sorry, if we can go back there too, please. Well-being is essential. Sorry, back one more, please. We have to look after ourselves. We have to be good to ourselves. We need to find a way to ensure that we take the time to get away from our project, get away from our work, rest, reflect, revive, renew ourselves, give ourselves new energy to go on, to do more, to lead more, to be more constructive, to be more impactful. And on top of that, what I would say is invest in yourself also from the point of view of your knowledge and your skills. And I think that's what's so amazing about JCI, to be quite honest, is just the opportunities JCI gives you to build your capacities across a whole range of different areas, engaging with people and learning new skills and really putting those into practice. I think it's just great. So invest in yourself is critical. So the last slide there before we finish up and open the floor for questions is just to sort of recap. What am I saying in this whole presentation? I'm saying, first of all, that the turbulent times we're facing now are different to the turbulent times we've always faced. We will always be in turbulent times of some sort or another. The question is, what do we want to see as the future? What's our vision for a future, for a better future for everybody? A sustainable and inclusive future, a future where our shared prosperity is developed by how we can cooperate and how we can make real this new paradigm on the right-hand side there between planet, people, prosperity, partnerships, and peace. So the first point I'm saying is that don't let ourselves be censored by what we've experienced in the past or by trends as we've assumed them. Let's be ambitious. Let's lead the change. Let's do what we can to make that real. Know our mission. Make it very, very clear what you're trying to achieve. Put it down on paper. Think about what you can offer. How can you add to this? How can you realize this? And why are you doing it? Keep asking yourself, why are you doing what you do? Be guided by your values. Let your values instruct you when nothing else will. When you don't have the immediate answers to the questions, look back in your values and let them be your guide. Be yourself, be authentic. Do what you need to do in the way you need to do it. Don't try to be anybody else. Be an honest, authentic leader. And as I said, leadership is at all sorts of different levels. Build partnerships. Don't go it alone if you want to have sustainable impact in difficult times or in good times. Lead the change by building partnerships, and never forget your own well-being in all of this. Make sure that you focus on yourself and your well-being. So I'm going to leave it there, and what I'd like to do now is for the last 10 minutes or whatever we have, 15 minutes we might have left, I'd like to open the floor to any thoughts or comments, questions, suggestions, critiques, or whatever you might have. And I just want to thanks again for listening to me. Much appreciated. And apologies for my technical blips at the start there. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. That was incredible. I really liked the part about being authentic and being who you are. It's really a beautiful point to make. And as Oscar Wilde stated, be yourself, everyone else is taken. Thank you so much. And we have a few minutes if people do have questions, if you want to drop it into the chat, or is Laura, you're kind of manning that side of it, are you?
Yes, I'm looking at the chat. There's nothing at the moment. But thank you so much, Andrew. And also, please don't hesitate, everyone, to take down the details and contact Andrew if you have any other questions that you might not put in the chat or have the opportunity to ask at the moment.
Yeah, no worries. I'm very happy to take any contact from anyone afterwards if you wish. It's great to have had the opportunity to speak to you all. And if you have any thoughts, feel free to raise them now. But otherwise, do get in touch later. And hopefully we'll meet at a future event in person. But I think you've done a great job to do this virtually. Well done to everybody.
Thank you so much, Andrew. We really appreciate your help. And I think actually we might have a question. Just give me a second. Oh yeah, it just thank yous. Are you able to see the thank yous?
I see some popping up, but actually now they're coming up. Yeah, I see some. I can't really see. I see I think they just pop up and then disappear. But anyway, seems positive, so that's good.
It is.
So,
Absolutely.
and by the way, I'm very happy to share this presentation. If there's anything of any interest for people, of course, please feel free to circulate it if it's of interest.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I think,
Okay.
Melanie, we can go. Have a lovely weekend, Andrew. And I was just saying that we can go to our next session. If you want, you are more than welcome to stay. We have 20 minutes left of this session.
Brilliant.
Okay, I'll leave you to it. Listen, thanks very much, everybody. Very nice to speak to you, and best of luck with the remainder of the conference.
Thank you so much, Andrew.
Take care.
Thanks.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Yeah, so wow, I can't believe we're at the end of the day already for the first virtual European conference. But not to worry, as tonight has only really just begun with opening ceremony, as I know the team have amazing plans. Teresa and I were delighted to be asked to MC today. I certainly learned an awful lot, and it was great to catch up with all my JCI friends from around the world, and also the opportunity to give a business pitch, which I did not expect. So I know, Teresa, you have a bit of feedback as well from the day.
So I just wanted to say thank you to everyone for the day. We've had so much fun. I think Melanie and I behind the scenes, as well as getting so much support from Laura and Annalisa. There was a few key things that stuck out for me personally this morning. One was getting to introduce Rona Nisi as the JCI Ireland president for 2020. I haven't had that opportunity yet this year, so that was pretty special to me. Getting to see the panel come to life was really exciting. There's been an awful lot of work in the background on that, so that was really fun. And I also enjoyed the hilarity of trying to count to 20 for all of us as a group. I think we can all agree it wasn't our finest JCI moment, but it really stood out as something special. So I think before I'm going to log off now from this, because I have to go and get ready for the opening ceremony, which is going to be in about 1 hour's time. So anyone who's not staying tuned for the Irish class or lesson now, it's time to go have a break, move around, and get yourselves all dressed up and dolled up for this evening. Thanks, Melissa. Or Melanie, sorry.
You're grand. Yeah, so earlier today we kind of got a little bit ahead of ourselves with the Couple